kick some ash. Klaatu Veratu Nectarine. That's the real Necronomicon. What up, guys? Bobo here with BrassReel Brothers. Thanks for coming back for some more hot, fresh popcorn and joining me in another episode of a BrassReel Halloween. We're kicking off this episode of the Timid Tuesdays. We got the uber cult classic, Army of Darkness. Directed by Sam Raimi and starring Bruce Campbell. And also, I guess, Mbeth David, she's on the billing, but she's barely in the movie. Well, immediately, this movie is different from its previous two. So I'm sure you guys know the Evil Dead trilogy now, or now I guess it's the Evil Dead trilogy and the Evil Dead show. Sam Raimi is a fully self-accomplished director. He didn't have any help from anybody. Him and Bruce Campbell have been friends for years. And when Sam Raimi was 21, and I'm guessing that Bruce Campbell was around that same age, they did Evil Dead. And the story goes is that Sam Raimi didn't even like horror movies. He just saw a horror movie a long time ago when he was younger, and he said, you know what, I can make a better horror movie than that. I'm sure it's a little bit more in-depth than that story, but that's kind of the short, abridged version of it. And so he made Evil Dead, which was hugely groundbreaking as far as effects were concerned. I think the budget they had was $150,000, and then it finished at like under $500,000. They went over budget, but they started with a $150,000 budget and didn't go over $500,000 with the original Evil Dead. The effects in that and everything are amazing, and it's truly frightening. It's scary. But the further along he went with these sequels, he got less and less horror involved because at the end of the day, he never really was like a hardcore horror fan. I'm sure he liked them, but it was just another genre of film to him. He wasn't obsessed like some of us are. So with Evil Dead 1 being like a really scary horror film, especially after we had seen like Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, this guy decided to do Evil Dead, and it kind of caught the eye of a lot of directors, including George A. Romero, the king of the Dead films. So by the time he did Evil Dead 2, that was sort of in a weird way like a remake of the first one, but just done better. But he also added this sort of second part of it. So the first half of Evil Dead 2 is like a remake of part 1, but then the second half you get to see all these other crazy things. That's where the chainsaw comes in, the shotgun. It gets way more cinematic in that one. You could tell they had a little bit more money. But this one is where they really had a lot of money, and you can tell that Sam Raimi was finally really making more of a movie that he wanted to make. And honestly, it picks up right from where part 2 leaves off. And they do some cool stuff where they show like the flashbacks from Evil Dead 2 while filming some new stuff to kind of throw in there with like him at S-Mart. And he's sort of narrating this flashback the whole time that you're seeing it. And when he's describing his story that had happened previously in the other films, the girl in the first movie is played by a different girl in the second movie. And then they show her again in this movie real quick, and it's played by Bridget Fonda. But they give you like a little recap of the last film or the last two films at the beginning of this movie. Kind of like when you're watching like a new season of something, they give you the recap of the last season. And it made me realize something. Sam Raimi made a successful trilogy of films. Now, while there's Ash vs. Evil Dead, which comes later, and that's a whole show, which is 3 seasons. This is actually one of the first trilogies I think I've ever seen that you can watch every movie by themselves without having to see the other films. Now, if you've seen the other films, the movies are even that much better, and they do completely connect with each other. But if you haven't seen the other films, this is actually one of the only trilogies I think I've ever seen where you really don't have to watch any of the other movies to watch an individual film. You can watch Evil Dead 2 and have never seen part 1. You can watch Army of Darkness and have never seen Evil Dead 1 and 2 and still enjoy the film. I never thought about it that way until I rewatched all these. As the movies go on, they get less horror and more comedy. This movie has more horror than I remembered in it, but it still is focused more on comedy. And it's very much an homage to sort of like the gothic horror days. I want to say that this movie kind of got made because of the cult following surrounding Evil Dead 1 and 2. The studio really realizes that, hey, Sam Raimi's a good director. Let's give him some real money to do something with. And man, it did well. This movie was a success. And it's got a huge following. And this movie paved the way for him to be able to create Ash vs. Evil Dead, because Ash vs. Evil Dead picks up right where this one leaves off, which is really cool. However, If you're watching Ash vs. Evil Dead, the show, you can watch that without watching any of these previous films because it gives you a sort of a recap. And it actually kind of feels like Indiana Jones meets Night of the Living Dead. Like seriously, think about it. He's stuck in a situation that he needs to get himself out of, and then he gets set on this whole little course by himself. This journey goes through these different obstacles, these different hurdles to get there. And even the character of Ash a little bit kind of reminds you of Indiana Jones. Just his demeanor, his behavior, the way he is with women. You kind of realize this whole series is sort of like the adventures of Ash. Think about it. So the premise of this movie is after fighting all the Evil Dead stuff and the Deadites in part 1 and 2, he gets transported back to this medieval time to where he's stuck there and he's trying to figure his way out. And it involves the Necronomicon and all that stuff, and ultimately he releases a whole army of the dead, hence the title Army of Darkness. And this actually was kind of called Bruce Campbell versus Army of Darkness. They've re-released the film in a special edition format, and it says Bruce Campbell versus Army of Darkness. And in the credits, when you're seeing it, it does say Bruce Campbell versus Army of Darkness when you're watching the movie. But the poster just says Army of Darkness. That's kind of one of those weird Edge of Tomorrow type things. But I do love this movie. I prefer the first two a little more, but I still love this movie. I mean, it's still an A+, 100% for me. It just has a little bit more comedy. But they're going for that. They're not like trying to forget about the horror, because just when you think they've forgotten about the horror, they throw it back in there and they throw it back in your face, and it's there. Not quite as gruesome and over the top as it was in Evil Dead 1 and 2. Like sometimes the blood was just outrageous. They do a couple of scenes in this to sort of pay tribute to that, where there's some over the top blood. But nothing like it was in Evil Dead 1 and 2. So while it touches on those elements here and there for the Evil Dead movies that you're familiar with, it still does its own thing. In moments, it's kind of Shakespearean in a way. That's all there on purpose for comedic value, I'm pretty sure. And like when Bruce Campbell first has an encounter with the Deadites at the very beginning of the movie and they throw him in this pit, which is pretty scary. They have this one lady eating the bread and she does the whole, "Into the pit with the bloodthirsty sons of whores!"
Into the pit with those bloodthirsty sons of whores!
My buddies and I rewound that 20 times when we first saw it. We thought it was so funny. As I was saying, when you get wrapped up into this medieval times storyline, you forget about the horror element, they throw it back in your face, including like the evil chasing POV shot, which leads them to this windmill house at one point that sort of, for a moment there, you kind of feel like the cabin in the woods in Evil Dead. And they go back to that, but it's like a cartoon revisit to Evil Dead 2. Instead of him like cutting his own hand off and stuff like that, he's created these little tiny versions of him that broke off of a mirror that are trying to attack him. And one of them like jumps his way into his mouth inside of his body and he swallows all this boiling water. I mean, it's just crazy.
How about some hot chocolate, huh?
Ends up making an evil Ash to where there's like two Ashes, which ultimately becomes the villain of the film. And when the Army of the Dead raises, because Ash is too stupid to remember the 3 words. To be honest with you, I can't ever remember that last one. Klaatu, Veratu, Noctu? Nocta? Not gonna work anymore, that's for sure. But all the practical effects they do in this movie are fantastic, and this was before CGI existed. You guys, I'm sure, are familiar with Greg Nicotero. Greg Nicotero, The Walking Dead, everything you see on there is all him. And I think he's actually taken over pretty much directing the show. But all the skeletons you see in this are all great, and it's all practical. Sam Raimi's even on record of saying that I want to do a big tribute in this movie in the 3rd act to sort of like the Ray Harryhausen films. If you guys don't know who Ray Harryhausen was, he's the guy that did all the stop motion back in the day with the King Kong, Godzilla films, any monster movies you saw stop motion in, Jason and the Argonauts, stuff like that, Clash of the Titans, that was all Ray Harryhausen. The guy was a pioneer for visual effects. But man, if they wanted to do a tribute to that, they accomplished it, because there are a ton of stop motion skeletons in this and puppeteered skeletons in this. Greg Nicotero said that they destroyed something like 800 skeletons in this movie. And there's a part where Ash makes his car into this Mad Max vehicle. Yeah, that's right, the car that's been in every Sam Raimi movie, which is Sam's car when he was a kid in high school. Literally, look at every Sam Raimi movie, you'll see that car. But they turned his car into this sort of Mad Max mobile, and he's got this blade on the front of it that's like a windmill blade, and he's just chopping skeletons in half left and right. And I love it that the skeletons all like have personalities individually. They're all yelling and screaming like, ah! Ah! It's someone in the car, we want, get in! saying one-liners like what I'm doing the whole, let's get the hell out of here.
Let's get the hell out of here!
So you're watching this movie and you're thinking to yourself, or if you're like me, I'm thinking, man, this started out as Evil Dead and one of the scariest movies I ever saw as a kid. And now I'm watching this and it's just like Ash is a superhero. He's just saving the day left and right with one-liners left and right, like the groovy.
Groovy.
And give me some sugar, baby.
Give me some sugar, baby.
Especially I love it at the beginning when he's talking to the guy that's his prisoner right next to him and he tells him who he is, Sir Henry and all this. First thing out of Ash's mouth.
Well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants.
So while it was going for much more of a comedy route than the full-on horror route, and they started doing that in Evil Dead 2 a little bit, this one's much more comedy, but it works on both levels. All the jokes work and all the horror works. It's all there. It's just a perfect hybrid of that type of film that he was going for. And this movie is pretty much what got him the ticket to do Spider-Man. Because it's medieval, there is a little bit of a love story that blossoms, but the girl that's in this, Annabeth Davids, she's barely in it. She's an afterthought. She's honestly just there so Bruce Campbell can have some one-liners.
And I made this for thee.
Good, I could use a horse blanket.
But the third act is a lot of fun. It's just an army of skeleton deadites everywhere. The leader, Evil Ash, is actually played by Bruce Campbell and he has all these awesome makeup on and everything. You can see he's got the burnt up face and the showing teeth. And of course, Ash saves the day and he gets to go back and you see him at S-Mart, again, telling the story. And he's got some scars and cuts on his face from what just happened. There's another girl in there who's Erica Eleniak. Ooh, she was hot stuff in the 90s. She's there at the end working in the store just so she can be somebody for him to grab onto and say another one-liner.
Hail to the king, baby.
And then it immediately sets it up for Ash vs. Evil Dead. So if you liked all these movies and you haven't seen Ash vs. Evil Dead, I highly encourage you to go watch those. They're awesome, a lot of fun. Goes a little off the rails in season 3, but overall, if you're an Ash fan, you're an Evil Dead fan, Army of Darkness fan, you're gonna love Ash vs. Evil Dead. Army of Darkness, I love it. It's fantastic. It's just as good every time I watch it. I love Bruce Campbell. That guy's a self-made man as well. Worked his tail off in Hollywood, and I can respect that. And now he's become a cult phenomenon. Everybody loves Bruce Campbell. And he's still in every one of Sam Raimi's movies, somewhere. Army of Darkness, some good old-fashioned gore-flavored 90s cheesy popcorn. Guys, that'll do it for this episode of a BrassReel Halloween. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for a BrassReel review with me and Andre. We're gonna be talking about another movie. Can't wait to see y'all throughout the rest of this month because it ain't over. Remember to look for BrassReel Brothers on Facebook. Look for Bobby Williams on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter, BrassReel Bobby at BrassReel. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button so you can help us get famous. And remember, if life gives you lemons, make some hot, fresh popcorn.
Well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants.